A fire breaks out in the world's tallest building, and it's up to the skyscraper's architect and a fire chief to save everyone inside. Listen as we discuss the most dangerous job in the world, Alan's inaccurate 80s t-shirt, and when a handshake simply won't do. Then we find out if 1974's The Towering Inferno stands the test of time.
Test of time, James and Alan have their say. Do the movies you love still hold up today? James says gladiator with a glut. Alan says as a father blah blah. It's the test of time, James and Alan have their say. Do the movies you love still hold up today? Test of time, James and Alan have their say. Do the movies you love still hold up today?
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Test of Time. My name is Alan Noah, and joining me in this non-Towering Inferno is my co-host, James Brief.
Thank you. We are live from the 6th floor in Manhattan, but it is not what was it in this film, 125 floors? Or 135, I think.
Yeah, well, the party in the movie takes place on the 135th floor, and then there's a few floors above that.
Well, no Inferno here.
Okay.
But, we're going to be discussing the Towering Inferno 50 years ago. It was a huge hit.
Sure.
It's associated with the disaster films of the 1970s.
Right.
It's not the first one. It's not even the producer's first one. We reviewed 1972's The Poseidon Adventure,
right,
which has a similar theme to this. And then there's airport films. And eventually this would wind up being redone again about 20 years later. I would say starting with maybe Independence Day in 1996,
right,
destroying American cities. And then, of course, you have The Day After Tomorrow. And 2012, the world is destroyed. The Towering Inferno really is a genre-defining film from this era.
Yeah, and from what I've read, this is kind of considered, by some at least, the disaster movie. It came after Poseidon, but the general consensus is that this is better than Poseidon. Irwin Allen's next movie is about bees. I think it's called The Swarming, known as a terrible flop. There's also Earthquake that I think came out around this time. Right. I believe 74, 75. That was not produced by Irwin Allen, but is also in this genre of the disaster flick. And yeah, the airport movies, but there weren't a ton of them, were there?
Yeah, there were a lot. There was Flood, and there was The Omega Man, Black Sunday, and probably the most famous disaster film ever in history is Titanic.
Right. But let's talk about The Towering Inferno. So for anyone who hasn't seen it, it's a disaster film about the grand opening of the tallest building in the world. Doug Roberts, the architect who designed the skyscraper, discovers that corners were cut to save money during construction. And wouldn't you know it, but a fire starts just as there's a grand opening gala on the 135th floor. Fire Chief Michael O'Halloran is called to the scene to help rescue everyone inside. That includes Doug's fiancée Susan, the skyscraper's builder and his family, a con man and the widow that he's wooing, a deaf woman and her 2 kids, the mayor, a senator, and other high-profile guests. As the fire grows, it gets harder and harder to get people out of this Towering Inferno. So I'm not going to ask you if this movie was a success, because it was. It was a huge mega hit.
Huge success. This film had a $14 million budget, pretty decent for the 70s, and it opened on December 14th, 1974. And it was the number 1 film or number 2 film in 1974. Do you know what the other 1974 film could be? I'll give you a hint. It's a very famous comedy. I have said that I've never watched this film, and I'm looking forward to watching it for the first time on this podcast. Eventually, we will be reviewing this. It is a Western film, a comedy, a very famous Western, the only very famous Western comedy.
Blazing Saddles.
That's correct, yeah.
Okay.
That film is also said to be top in 1974. It really depends with these films in the pre-VHS home video market. These films were re-released years later, so sometimes you're going by the 1974 box office, and sometimes you're going by all of the movie releases of this version of it. So either way, it was an enormous film. And this is a year before Jaws. And Jaws is interesting. Jaws is known as the first blockbuster, right?
Right.
And this is a film that's known as a tentpole film. Do you know what a tentpole film is versus, say, a blockbuster?
I assumed tentpole meant that this is what the studios can build their fiscal year or whatever around, so that it props up everything else that they make. If this movie is a success, then we're good for the year, basically.
That's what I thought it was. And
Okay.
I would almost say that's probably one of these backronyms of that's what it is today.
Okay.
But if you've seen one of these old time tents, when they used to put up like a dozen of those little poles, and there were a lot of different peaks because they would put a center one, but then there'd be 7 different ones all around it, probably symmetrically. A tent pole release meant they basically put it in New York and LA and Chicago and Miami. And then you get word of mouth in the city because a lot of city folk will see it. And then you release it in the suburbs of Chicago and Long Island, and then, in the Fort Lauderdale area outside Miami. And then you go to the rural areas a couple months later, as opposed to, say, a blockbuster, which is what we do today, which is everything is released immediately. That this new Marvel film is being released on every single theater on the same Friday or midnight, whatever. So everyone's lining up around the block.
That's interesting that they would kind of stagger the release like that.
Yeah, and I feel like disaster films are almost inevitable because going back to the Bible, there's this famous story of the Tower of Babel,
right,
in which early humans were developing this early so-called technology, building stuff. And they said, we'll build so tall, we'll reach heaven. And, the hubris of man, they weren't able to do it. It fell down. All these people died and blah, blah, blah. Thousands of years later, we reviewed this film from 1997, Titanic, about the disaster. What was its nickname before it sailed? How did they describe the ship?
Oh, right, that it was unsinkable.
Unsinkable, because probably one of the most dangerous jobs ever is a fisherman. The sea is so dangerous, and the people today, it's so dangerous to be a modern fisherman. You still have a good chance of dying from that. And to finally say, we can beat nature, the hubris. And you're going to build a tower so tall, we're getting back to the Tower of Babel, that nothing could possibly destroy us here.
Right. And this movie was made while the Twin Towers were being built here in New York City. And that was kind of the inspiration for this movie of, wow, these skyscrapers, which were a thing in 1974, but they just kept getting bigger and taller. And after the success of the Poseidon Adventure, Irwin Allen was looking to do another disaster flick. And there were these books that were kind of about this thing, a skyscraper that caught on fire. And he latched on to the idea. But moving from the building itself to the humans that are in this movie, Steve McQueen and Paul Newman, I know that these are big names, and I think maybe the only other movie that I've seen with Paul Newman in it was the movie we did, Slapshot. I know he was the voice in Cars, only the first Cars, because I think he passed away before the second one, I'm pretty sure.
We are going to be reviewing 2 films of his in early 2025.
Right, I did see that on the calendar, but I'm not really familiar with him. I don't think I've ever seen anything with Steve McQueen, but as I was reading up about this movie, this was a big deal that they were both in this movie together because apparently there was a rivalry. Steve McQueen was bitter at Paul Newman because Paul Newman was a bigger star than him, and he was a little jealous. And they wanted Steve McQueen to be the architect character, and he was not interested. He wanted to be the firefighter, but he was like, yeah, get someone else good to be the architect. And then they got Paul Newman, and then Steve McQueen kind of maybe didn't love that. And the deal was that they were both going to be top billed. In the title card, they're both there at the same time. One's on the left, one's on the right, one's up, one's down. So if you're reading it left to right, one is top billed. If you're reading it top down, the other one's top billed. I forget which is which, doesn't really matter.
They did the same thing on the poster.
Yeah, and apparently then they also kind of got into counting lines, that they had to have the same number of lines and the same number, like the same amount of screen time. And they both had to be the hero of the movie. It kind of makes you roll your eyes of like, Jesus, guys, get over your fucking ego. But apparently they were both professionals on set, and they did in fact get along once they started hanging out and stuff. And I think they have decent chemistry in the movie. I didn't realize when I was watching it, oh, these two guys hate each other. I didn't pick up on that at all.
It's interesting. William Holden, who plays the owner of the tower, he actually wanted top billing,
right?
But apparently he hadn't had a hit in since the '60s. So they were like, "Sit down, Mr. Holden. You're no Paul Newman. You're no Steve McQueen."
Right. I didn't know who that guy was.
Yeah, I was looking at the credits and I go, "Oh, look, Mike Lookinland." I recognized Bobby Brady.
Well, that's fair because you're a child of the late 70s, 80s, and you watched Brady Bunch reruns.
I'm not a child of the late 70s. I'm a child of the 80s and 90s. We were born.
Yeah,
not a child of. There's a difference.
I have that shirt that I love and I wear every year at Nick's Marathon of the Super Mario 3 Mario, and it says made in the 80s, which is not technically true for me, but I wear the shirt anyway because close enough. Who cares? But other names I recognize in the cast, Faye Dunaway. We talked about Chinatown earlier this year because that was the 50th anniversary of that movie. Fred Astaire, another name I know, but I did not recognize him. I don't think I've ever seen a Fred Astaire movie until now.
I only know Singing in the Rain, and I don't know what he looks like. I just know there's a guy going, "I'm singing in the rain."
I have seen Singing in the Rain. I watched it as a kid. I remember nothing about it.
But he's also an old man in this film.
Yeah.
You wouldn't recognize him anyway.
Yeah, exactly. I did recognize the name Robert Vaughn from Superman 3. He was bad guy. Robert Wagner, who I know from Austin Powers, International Man of Mystery.
That's right.
But the name that I really wasn't expecting to see in the credits.
Yeah, A Test of Time for sure.
Yeah, O.J. Simpson. Look, this is an all-star cast for 1974. It makes sense that the producers, who were very clearly trying to stack this movie with big A-list names, would put O.J. Simpson in the movie. He was at the top of his game as a football player. He wanted to act. Why not put O.J. Simpson in this movie?
It's hard to underestimate how beloved this guy was. I mean, everyone loved this guy. I knew him mostly as a funny actor as a kid.
Yeah, and I did read something in the trivia about how O.J. Simpson and Robert Wagner were both involved in their wife's death in a mysterious way or something. I forget exactly how this like piece of trivia was worded, and then I had to look up the thing about Natalie Wood. I forgot that they were married. A little bit of a stretch there to compare them, but it's kind of funny how this movie is sort of structured because it's an ensemble. It kind of leaps from character to character, not unlike the movie we talked about last week, Magnolia. But the difference here is that the actors and the characters are kind of second fiddle to the building that's on fire. I was going to say that's maybe why people went to the movies, and I don't really know that's true. Maybe they went to see Steve McQueen and Paul Newman.
I think it's a little bit of both. The premise of the film, special effects and everything, and also the actors are big, and everyone loved Paul Newman back then. The poster is like 135 floors of terror, and then it shows like 12 stars pictures on it. So it's really going after both genres. If you like Steve McQueen, see The Towering Inferno. If you want to see disaster and a lot of deaths on film, see The Towering Inferno.
Sure. Well, let's go through some of the characters. So there's Doug, played by Paul Newman, and his girlfriend, Susan, played by Faye Dunaway, or fiance, whatever. I like their chemistry. I think Faye Dunaway is super sexy in this movie. I think it's a little bit of a bummer that she kind of disappears for most of the movie because, you know, she's just kind of brushed off to the side and kind of largely forgotten about for long chunks of time. Then you have Fred Astaire, who plays a con man, and he's wooing this widow. I kind of felt like that was eye roll worthy because he's a con man who basically just confesses to her that he's a con man pretty quickly. Basically, once the building catches fire, he's like racked with guilt. And she's like, oh, it's fine. I don't mind. And that just kind of drops, like on the poster, it says he's the con man. And it's like, is he though? I mean, he cons nobody.
I mean, he's pulling one of the older cons, which is make nice to an old lady or an old man before they die and then, get put into the will or whatever it is, maybe marry her or something.
No, he just wanted to sell her bogus stocks.
Okay, fine. Unfortunately, that does hold up today. I mean, who's getting scammed by these so-called phishing scams, PH? I mean, he happens to be an old man scamming an old lady, but I kind of like that story, but I didn't wind up liking the total resolution of it. You'd think he's going to die.
Yes,
and instead they kill the lady. I kind of get where they were going because he survives. He kind of thinks, I survived this whole thing, and now I get to be with the woman I love, and no, she died. And I wish it was kind of maybe because of his hubris that killed her, or maybe something that if you weren't a horrible old man, maybe she wouldn't have gone in that elevator for some reason and, something like that.
I 1,000% agree. I had that exact thing in my notes. He should have died. He has an arc. His arc is he's a con man. He's going to pull this con. Then he meets this woman and he actually falls for her and he decides not to be a con man anymore. It's an arc kind of in air quotes. It's a very short arc and he's on screen for a handful of minutes. But yeah, then he dies. Mrs. Mueller, the woman that he's conning, she is a hero in this movie. She spends a lot of her time on screen saving these kids. There are kids of a deaf mom who's also, by the way, just summarily written out of the movie, which I think is weird because that is interesting. This woman who's deaf, how does she know that the building's on fire? She doesn't hear the alarm, so they have to go rescue her. But then, I'm not sure if it's OJ or one of the other guards, rescues her, and then you never see her again, ever. And now this woman, Miss Mueller, is going after these kids. She's protecting the kids. She's with Doug as they're going around this building and navigating the stairwell that's on fire, and then it breaks, and she makes this epic leap, and she's a hero. And then she dies just by falling out of the elevator, and she doesn't get a death scene. She doesn't get a moment. You see her body hit the fucking building on the way down. It's like, yo, they did her dirty. They did this character really fucking dirty, and it sucks.
Yeah, this old lady, I don't mean to laugh, but it's obviously not her. It's like, it's a mannequin or it's something falling down the model, but it really, boom, hits her head. What the fuck?
Exactly. What the fuck? And not every character in this movie who dies is going to get a death scene, and that makes sense. But we spend a lot of time with this Mrs. Mueller character. The actress's name is Jennifer Jones. I'm not familiar with her work, but I know this was her last movie. She does a great job in the movie, and they dick her over. Compare that with Robert Wagner. He plays Dan Bigelow, which I only know because I'm looking at the cast. I would not have remembered that, to be clear. And his lover, they die because they have this secret tryst, and she's his secretary, and no one can know that they're sleeping together. And so then the building catches fire, and no one knows where they are, and they can't escape. That's a short story. These characters are on screen for only a couple of minutes, but they both get deaths. You see them fall and run and try to outrun the fire, and then he can't, and he falls down, and she's gasping for air, and she smashes the window, and then she has to leap. It's cinematic, and nice that they gave those characters a cinematic death, but some of the others are just really like, oh, they died.
Those characters' deaths, I think, were the most effective to me in the film because they really reminded me of those poor souls on September 11, 2001. Some of them probably tried to make it down and then they couldn't. I'm talking about the people that either fell or leapt out of those buildings as the jet fuel was slowly going into their offices, the breathing in that fumes, and these poor people just had to jump in that fear. That's really what I think this film does very, very well. I don't know what I would have done. I think I probably would have done what that guy did. I think I would have taken a chance and tried to run in. Holy shit, I would have burned to death horribly.
Yeah.
And they have such a 70s thing. They have wall-to-wall carpeting everywhere.
Sure.
And that's probably what kills a lot more people. Probably kills this Robert Wagner guy.
Kind of related, when the fire chief is there and he's asking about who the tenants are, and I think OJ is like, why do you care who the tenants are? And he says, well, I need to know if someone in here is a wool manufacturer because the flames will cause some chemical. What about tennis ball manufacturers? Because I bet you didn't know that tennis ball manufacturing is blah 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 dangerous when there's a fire. And I don't know about skyscrapers in San Francisco in the 70s, but would there be tennis ball manufacturers on the 80th floor of a fucking skyscraper?
I was very confused by that, but my headcanon is that this is all pre-EPA. This is pre-70s regulation. Before regulation and unions and whatnot, you really probably walked home from your job in the mine or whatever filled and soaked in combustible chemicals. My guess is that this was a legitimate hazard. I don't think you'd have to know that today. I think if today the firefighter asking who's in the building, it would definitely be a class thing, like who do we have to save? But I feel like back then maybe there was something that you want to know that in a fire.
Well, yeah, you want to know that in a fire. I'm not talking about regulation. I'm talking about real estate. Who the fuck is going to pay for real estate to make tennis balls 80 floors up in San Francisco? The rent cost is insane. You manufacture tennis balls in a factory near the train station. The reason I think that line is really there is to make firefighters in general, and specifically the Steve McQueen character, seem really intelligent and know what they're doing. These people have a really, really terrifying job. And I think that's true with firefighters anywhere in the world, but especially in a city with skyscrapers when you got to run into a fucking death trap. I mean, it's a death trap. If a skyscraper's on fire, that's a death trap. And these guys run in to save people's lives. I'm in no way disparaging firefighters in, rural communities, because I'm sure that's terrifying too. But this movie is dedicated to the bravery of firefighters, and that comes across. You feel that throughout the movie. There's one guy who says that he's afraid of going in the elevator shaft, and they mock him for being afraid. And it's like, okay, machismo, firefighter, tough guys. Also, yeah, I could imagine a guy out of a group of however many are there being petrified. Who the fuck wouldn't be,
Of course, yeah. I think it's weird that they give the dedication to the firefighters at the beginning of the film.
That's true.
I think it would have been much more effective to go, holy shit, this is maybe somewhat exaggerated, but yeah, it's not completely exaggerated what these guys go through, men and women today.
It's also kind of tipping your hand about what the movie's going to be about and who some of your heroes are going to be,
right?
Which I think probably wasn't terribly surprising. Steve McQueen's top billed. You don't see him for the first 30 whatever minutes. Then he shows up in a firefighter helmet. Okay, yeah, he's going to be a hero.
Speaking of heroes, the villains in the Towering Inferno is the son-in-law and possibly the owner too, and other subcontractors. That's implied. But everyone's cut corners. But worst of all, they cut corners on the electrical.
Right.
I actually don't like one of the deaths in this film. That is the death of Roger Simmons, the guy played by Richard Chamberlain. He's the evil son-in-law.
Right.
He's the main guy that cut corners, and he specifically cut corners on the electrical. I wish this guy survived. I think this is a man who's supposed to face justice because less than 200 people died, and this guy's one of them. He doesn't get to answer for it. I mean, I guess he gets the ultimate punishment himself. He died also. Yeah, you're satisfied for a second this guy dies, but no, this guy should go down in history as the guy that caused this disaster.
I mean, he probably does, maybe, or maybe not, because he dies and then he has to die a hero.
The son-in-law goes down a coward. He caused the death of the senator,
Right,
and everyone else by trying to overwhelm that chair, which has other problems. A chair that holds one lady, put two ladies in there, and also it's a steel chair. Fuck the chair and just put like a strap on there, like they did in Air Force One. They wasted 250 pounds on that stupid chair. But William Holden's character, James Duncan, he survives, even though he says, I pledge to build a building that this will never happen again. He's probably going to be the one that gets sued for all these 200 deaths. And
probably,
while he may have been, it's implied he cut corners elsewhere. He seems to be very mad that electrical was cut because he really respects Paul Newman. Maybe the guy got like the aluminum faucets instead of the brass ones, but I don't think he cut corners to risk people's lives. And I think he's going to be blamed for it.
Oh, sure. And he hired his incompetent son-in-law, who tragically died, and rest in peace. But also, yeah, we're suing you. No, that totally makes sense. We kind of talked about the elevator scene because that's where Mrs. Mueller meets her untimely and unceremonious end. But that scene, I thought, was pretty effective. I mean, there's a few moments where you're kind of like, okay, green screen, miniature, whatever along the way. But that was still thrilling. I kind of didn't really understand how they attached the cable from the helicopter onto the top of the elevator. Maybe I missed something, but like there's a carabiner or winch, whatever. But like, why would there just be a thing on top of the elevator to attach it to?
They implied that's what holds the elevator, the scenic elevator, to the building. And that's almost severed. So they put a hook on that same hook and then cut the building's wires. They didn't explain it perfectly, but that seems to be what the engineering issue was.
Okay. Also, it's weird that the fire chief does the thing where he's lowered from the helicopter to attach this winch. I get it for the movie because it's Steve McQueen and they wanted to put the big movie star in a big action set piece kind of moment. Sure. But also from a logical point of view, you don't send the fire chief to do that. The fire chief is making all the decisions. He's coordinating everything. He knows all of the details about the team on this floor and the other team on that floor and what these people are doing in the lobby. You don't send that guy on what is effectively a suicide mission. You send Carl, the new guy, to do that.
I agree with you. And all they need to do is add one line about, I'm not sending some young guy with a newborn kid on a suicide mission. If I'm giving the orders, I'm willing to go myself. But I was thinking the same thing. I was thinking they're sending you because you're Steve McQueen.
Right.
Because they actually do have a younger firefighter in the elevator. I thought there was something weird that Paul Newman's character or whoever it is, that he says, I'm putting that elevator as a gravity elevator. It's going to go down once. I want a firefighter in there.
Right.
And I'm like, why would you put a firefighter in there? Of course it helped. It works out well. But I was thinking, oh, this young guy who climbs out on top of the elevator, he's going to do all the stuff. And it's still Steve McQueen doing it.
Right. And then that guy is holding on for dear life, and Steve McQueen has to save him and hold on to the elevator for himself and hold on to the wire and hold on to this guy. And then they make it. He drops him just when he's going to land on the cushion. He's fine. And then these two men shake hands. And like, okay, fine. I get it. It was a different time in the 70s, but no, fuck that. You hug. Like, sorry. Like, this is not a time for a handshake. This is when you go for the hug. This man saved your life. Hug.
You know what, Al? I agree with you. You hug that guy. I was thinking the same thing. But we have not talked about one other person on the crew. Very, very important man. One of our favorite people in all of Hollywood, all of movie industry.
Who's that?
The number 2 Academy Award nominated person of all time.
Oh, okay. You're talking about John Williams, who did the score of this movie. Right.
I was kind of getting into the score a little bit and thinking, it's a good score. I'm kind of humming along to it a little bit. I was digging it.
Okay. This is early in his career. This is before Jaws, as you mentioned. I read something like he knew Irwin Allen. He had done some TV work with him, because I think they both started in TV, so they knew each other. Apparently, Irwin Allen did not like the score for the beginning of the movie, that long helicopter shot into San Francisco. And he said, just something's missing. I don't like it. I don't know what. And John Williams, young man at the time, is like, I don't know what to do. What's he looking for? And then someone else kind of whispered in his ear, when Irwin's credit appears, put in a symbol and he'll love it. And then he did that. That was the only change he made. And then the next time Irwin Allen saw it, he was like, I love this version so much better. What did you change? And it was just the symbol for his name.
I think that's very funny. You mean a symbol as in like the drums, the percussion symbols?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's fantastic. I love that.
But James, what do you think about the Towering Inferno as a whole? Do you think the movie stands the test of time?
I have to say, this film was 3 hours. This film didn't need to be 3 hours. There's, for example, a part where Paul Newman is helping the kids down a broken piece of metal, and you see all 4 characters go down the exact same way again and again. It reminded me a little bit of the Poseidon Adventure from the same producer, where they all have to swim underwater during a sequence, but you don't see the exact same sequence 7 times. You see little parts of it. That's where he's swimming against. Right. But here we literally see the exact same thing. It was very, very boring. I was actually like, move it on, folks. Everything that could go wrong does go wrong. They finally get a chair up there, but it only fits 1 person. And then they get the chair and it's working, but now they run out of time. And now they do have a way to flood the place. But, randomly half of us are going to get killed. I love how before the thing explodes, they say, at least some of us will survive. So they know people won't make it. They try to go down the stairs, but then the stairs blow up. I have to say, though, the thing that really, really stuck to me was the fact that the Towering Inferno certainly did not expect the Glendale fire of June 14th, 2017. Have you heard of this disaster?
No.
75 people died in a skyscraper in London, and this fire just went up and up. And I don't know the full story, but I think it went through fire doors, and it's a terrifying thing. So, the Poseidon Adventure, which I liked, it's still a boat that turns upside down. I'm not that scared of that happening to me.
Okay.
But, fire is fire. It doesn't matter how advanced we are. And this really happened. And it's not even 10 years ago. This happened 7 years ago. And I found the film to be scary. I think it could be redone. It could be done today with a skyscraper of the modern age that nothing could go wrong and smart everything. And, all it takes is the same guy. You're spending $2 billion on that tower. He'd rather spend $1.95 billion on that tower. That definitely does happen. So I found this entertaining. 1974's The Towering Inferno. While it could have cut half an hour, I thought it was fun. I think it stands the test of time. What did you think? Did you find it too long, entertaining? What did you think?
First off, it's interesting that you said that the death that really affected you was Robert Wagner and his girlfriend. The one that kind of got me, actually there were 2. One was this old married couple. I don't think they were main characters before this moment, but you see them having a conversation, I think before she goes in the elevator, and she's worried about what's going to happen to our daughter. She doesn't know where I keep the key to the safe deposit box. Oh no. And he's like, oh, the things you think of, very dismissive and condescending. And it's like, no, that's actually a very relevant thing for her to be thinking of right now. And that's why you need to make plans and wills and documents and all of these things. But her thinking of that kind of hit me. The other death that really got me was the bartender, who has, I think, maybe 3 lines in the movie. You don't spend a lot of time with him. He seems perfectly likable and a nice guy. And then when they're gonna flood the floor, he goes and positions himself under the bar. And I was like, that's perfect. He picked the perfect spot. If I was there, I would say, shit, man, you picked the exact right spot. And then he dies because a statue that's maybe a bird or something falls in just the right way where the pointy part goes under the bar and impales him. And it's like, oh, fuck.
I was surprised no one was told to cover their heads. That's something I kept thinking. I was thinking, yeah, the ceiling's going to fall. Everyone should be wearing something around their head. Put a bowl on there, a towel at least.
Yeah, I mean, I did think that scene was effective because kind of what you were saying before. Yeah, people are going to die. There's going to be a flood and a lot of people are going to go out the windows or drown or whatever. But yeah, some will survive. This is the least bad option. And there's a lot of that in the movie. We're going to do this. This is the best thing we can do. Oh, wait, now it's not anymore. And these guys are figuring it out and they're making mistakes. And it feels like, yeah, this is what would happen. After that happens and, you know, the water extinguishes a lot of the flames, it does sort of look like the gas line was turned off, which is what really happened. You know, someone just kind of turned a switch and then the propane stopped coming out of the thing and yay, the fire goes off.
Yeah, it seemed like these firefighters specifically aiming hoses directly at the fire for like 30 minutes straight does nothing but make it go faster. And water kind of randomly getting one shot to go down all the stairwells completely smothers the whole building.
Yeah, it's a little bit unrealistic. But you mentioned this other real world skyscraper fire. That wasn't the thing I was thinking of. I was thinking of 9/11. Watching a building burn, it just makes me think of that day. And I think that is like the thing about this movie that doesn't stand the test of time. I disagree with you that they could remake this movie. I don't think people want to see that now. I would say if you have never seen the Towering Inferno before and you were in New York City on September 11th or you lost somebody on September 11th, I would not recommend that you watch this movie. I would think this movie would be incredibly triggering and deeply, deeply upsetting for a lot of people. It's not the movie's fault. When they made this movie in 74, no one was thinking about that because of course not. But I would caution like a blanket recommendation of the Towering Inferno because I think it would be really, really traumatizing for a lot of people. I'm speaking personally, like watching the building in flames was hard for me. I do agree with you overall that the movie is thrilling. It's exciting. I wanted to keep watching it even though I knew it was long. I just wanted to see what was going to happen. I was curious about how they were going to end this movie. Does the entire building go up? Do some people get out? What's the end game? I was invested in seeing what was going to happen, even though honestly a lot of the characters are paper thin, which I think you could say about a lot of disaster movies. It's not really what the movie's about. So overall, I'm going to say that yes, the movie does stand the test of time. I think it is an entertaining movie. It looks pretty damn good 50 years after it was released. One of the last things that you see in the movie is O.J. Simpson handing a kitty cat to Fred Astaire. That was not on my fucking bingo card. I was not expecting that.
The future murderer comforts the con man.
I mean, that just kind of blows my mind.
All right. And one thing, out of respect to the victims of this, I said the name wrong. It was the Grenfell Tower, not the Glendale. So, yeah, 70 people died and 70 injured, 223 escaped.
Well, I mean, the end of the movie is Steve McQueen's character saying less than 200 people died. Thank God. It could be 10,000.
That's triage. That's the way a firefighter would score a success.
Right. No, and I'm saying, like, how deeply disturbing is that yay, only 200 people died. Phew, we dodged a bullet. I'm not saying it's unrealistic. I'm just saying that is a profoundly disturbing way to end a movie. But that's going to do it for us this week. Next week, it's our Christmas episode, and we're going to talk about It's a Wonderful Life. I've never seen that movie.
This will be my second time ever seeing the film, and I'm looking forward to it.
Awesome. In the meantime, we want to hear from you guys. We are at Test of Time Pod on Facebook, X, Instagram, and Threads. Write to us. Let us know your thoughts about skyscrapers and fires and firemen and Steve McQueen and Paul Newman, or Paul Newman and Steve McQueen, depending on your personal preference. And we'll see you next time.
Bye.